And she's leading an amazing transformation of her museum, her charge, into a living, vibrant, multicultural space that celebrates and connects us across cultures. She brings a very diverse career history, spanning over 25 years in the technology and professional service sectors. And she's applying this experience in really where she brought deep experience in working in business, Japan and New Zealand. And today she's going to talk to us about the role of museums in citizen engagement. Please make her welcome.
Thank you, Katrina. And hello, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Well, today I'm going to talk to you about, and talk with you, I hope, about museums. I think all of us have a deep interest in what's happening with museums as we see them as places that house our cultural soul. Museums have had such a long history going back to the 3rd century BC. And in fact, this culture has spread to nearly every part of the world. And today it's become quite uncommon to find any place in the world, no matter how small or large it is, without a museum. So, like the 20th century, which in itself is a remarkable feat, which should also tell us something about museums, that they have an inherent capacity to reinvent themselves over the centuries. So we should gain great confidence from that. Given the dramatic change in the 21st century, and what we're referring to as the post-truth world, museums are again charged with the responsibility to reinvent themselves. So let's describe this current context of post-truth. A world where evidence and fact have no value, where the public discourse is heightened by fear and exaggeration, where in any institution has created live views wherever we go in the digital. And the psychological impact of that post-truth world creates a landscape of mistrust. Perhaps we could call this period a post-trust world, where there's been significant erosion of trust in our public institutions as a result. So in this space, museums stand as a trusted institution. And it's a rare privilege, really, that we must uphold and delicately care for this trust that people have placed in us. And we're doing this, and I think we bear the burden of responsibility to do this by redefining our vision, our mission, in a way that reflects the hopes and aspirations of each and every one of us in our society. Told stories to amplify the underrepresented voices, and really in so doing to reaffirm our contract of trust with the visitors. This means that our cultural producers, our artists, our writers, in all of our museums, archives, libraries, all of our cultural institutions really, have a unique and vital role and responsibility in provoking new thought and through this conference alone in bringing these issues to the fore. Museums are active when they are rooted in their societies, when they grow from the communities and are able to provide visions for their future. These societies and cultures are different, so solutions in one country will not be relevant in another. And as societies change, so must museums, to better reflect their histories and their current realities. After all, museums do not exist for themselves alone. They must exist only if they enrich lives. And they play a key role in the education of desire and a wish for us all to make a better life. Museums hold the cultural soul of a nation, and in fact they are culture in action. And if you take an example of the Immigration Museum, we are embedded in this city, Melbourne, in one of the most diverse geographies of the planet, with over 165 languages spoken in Melbourne, including people from all over the world, making all of our hyper-local work intrinsically international. So the Immigration Museum intends to support difference and multiplicity of cultures as core to the daily life of the museum. And today we are asking ourselves, what kind of museum does today's Melbourne need? What kind of museum do you want to visit? And as we ask these questions, we know that our future will lie in developing creative and collaborative approaches to cultural participation. So we have continued to support and initiate projects that are inspired by actively listening to the needs of our communities around us. Can we do more? Of course we can. Absolutely. And this talk is very much about taking us into that journey as we reimagine the Immigration Museum. It's not just about the Immigration Museum, it's really about most of our institutions and the ways in which we might need to reimagine the work that we do. Today we live in an environment of lower public largesse, with reduced government funding, and again, to find our relevance, it is all the more important that we become agents of change. Museums are a unique place to take on this social responsibility and become a place for people rather than be just monuments of them. To positively disrupt, to challenge the status quo, to start conversations, to be responsible, responsive and agile, and most importantly, we need to play. It's people and not objects alone that carry culture, and it seems now more important than ever to have empathy and compassion for each other so that we can find ways to explore at length complex issues and discover hidden truths. After all, culture cannot exist without humans, so sharing stories, life experiences, skills in a welcoming social environment is completely integral to what museums like Immigration Museum aspire to be each day. And in a world, as museums become agents of, change, I would suggest that museums need to become agents of truth. Indeed, as agents of truths, because the word truth reinforces the false construction of a singular truth. I think museums' truths are born out of an immense privilege and that of limited demography of those who continue to make these truths, and I think these truths are being deeply contested, as we can see already. So museums must be spaces that are alive, aware, connected across cultures, where we're being called upon to be brave, where we're being called upon to be pioneers in the art of truth-telling. I think Immigration Museum has done a really good job in the past as well of shedding the light on some truths, for example, in the work with Behind the Wire, with stories from detention. And more we will be seeking the license to bring out some of these truths. We want to be a safe place for difficult conversations. This is an example of an event that we ran called African Gangs, and it was really giving the community a safe space for them. We literally handed over agency of that space to the community at the time for them to sort of go through the complexity of what they were faced with. Museums identify new voices that are not present in the traditional media. All too often we hear negative stories, for example, in the media, and this is an example of our having created a space where some other voices could come to the fore that weren't traditionally reflected. The good work that was being done by many people, by these women, for example, who were doing incredible work in their communities. So museums, again, are becoming increasingly more innovative, more people-oriented, community-minded, and have citizens' engagement at their heart. And above all, we want to bring children's voices into the museum. We must do that for them to play a major role in the development of the world in the 21st century and beyond. So the journey of transforming a museum is more about turning fixed boxes of fascination into living, vibrant, dynamic spaces that almost like a friend and a companion to our lives. And it's very much about inviting a multitude of voices and spaces where this kind of activity alone becomes art. Creating those inclusive spaces where the joy lies in the act of engaging in the space, a place where we learn about respect, empathy, where we engage with the other, only to discover that we share far more than the ways in which we might differ. And for us to then together find and discover our shared humanity. Again, safe spaces facilitating business across borders as well. So are we there yet? I don't think so. I think we have a lot more ahead of us. So what's the roadmap to a socially engaged museum like this, like the one that we're imagining, that we already, I think, have the genesis of? And the Immigration Museum has been a socially engaged museum for a number of years. But it's about, well, how do we scale this up? How do we stay relevant? How do we create public value through citizens' engagement? And I think a key aspect of that is going to be around sharing agency with our cultural knowledge holders. You know, how do we bring them into our spaces? How do we invite that diversity of thought? How do we move from, you know, doing to doing for, and then doing with? I mean, this kind of thinking also raises some questions around collections. How do we create and strengthen the bond between the community and its collections? Do we have a responsibility for getting the collection and knowledge out to as many areas as we can? I mean, there's some kind of this space. But essential to this is that the approach to sharing agency must be genuine and authentic, and this kind of participatory approach needs intentionality. It requires awareness around questions like, who has the knowledge? Who drives the conversation? Who creates and shapes the narrative? I think it requires the voice of community to come into this space, and it may require us identifying as well, where are the gatekeepers, and how do we address and bring everybody along with us on this journey. There is value in the museum becoming expert and bringing all these diverse voices around the table. You know, our museum is prepared to cede control to others. Are we prepared to bring in the so-called invader and the outsider? And if you look at this ladder of how we go from doing to, doing for, doing with, we are always striving to move up that ladder to a place where we are co-producing, co-designing all of our experiences. And this is a great example of where that happened recently during Ramadan. We held an iftar dinner in the museum atrium, and this dinner was prepared by Moroccan Soupa, the chef who needs no introduction in many places, Hana Safiri, who's a social justice advocate. All of the food that she prepares usually is prepared in a climate of, you know, women's empowerment, really helping a lot of underprivileged women gain livelihood and securing their futures. And this was a wonderful environment in which this was the first public-private iftar dinner ever held at the museum, where, you know, we had, for example, members of all parts of our community. This was multicultural Australia at its best, really, in terms of the kind of voices that were there around the table and who was present in the room. And it was really heartening to see. So as museums, we now need to set the table for our allies, for our adversaries. The small changes like this go a long way in transforming the museum and the world around us. It inspires a more socially connected and civically engaged museum. And this is an example of where many of the participants, many visitors were treated to insight into what Ramadan meant and the practices in the Muslim religion. And again, people left that room feeling like they really understood their shared humanity better. They understood what is common amongst us. This is random acts of kindness part of a major event that occurred just about a week or so ago, again, which saw us using our space in a way that was inclusive and where we shared agency. We handed over the space to another organization. And, you know, without being political, our spaces and places can give voice to the citizens in matters pertaining to how they are governed, by creating avenues for free discussions and dialogues, where new narratives are explored and shaped. Museums are new to soft power, but their influence is likely to be profound because they present more than just, you know, short media moments. They attract and engage with people in real time and space, and they contribute to cultural intelligence among the diversity of city dwellers, visitors, policymakers, and leaders. And soft power requires and refers to winning people over on the basis of cultural appeal and ethical values, as opposed to the more conventional diplomatic strategies or brute economic or military force. It is by no means a novel concept, but it has particular contemporary relevance in a fractious, crowded, pluralistic world, the kind of world that we find ourselves in today. So if you consider the public participation spectrum, the highest goal would be to place decision-making in the hands of the public, where we implement what you decide. And as we move up this spectrum from, informing people to consulting the public, to involving them directly, and then to partnering with the public in each aspect of our decisions, when we collaborate around the development of alternatives and the identification of preferred solutions, really, which way are we headed up that spectrum? And again, I ask, are we there yet? Well, we're getting there, and we certainly intend to get there. And the questions we need to ask of ourselves is, how would our business models need to change to enable this? How would we deliver citizens' engagement, but at scale? It's okay to be doing this. Most of us have done this. We have community advisory boards, focus groups, and so on. But those forms of participation are still limited by design. It is much more important to really think about this from the perspective of meaningful outcomes. So I ask the question again, how can anyone who's never been able to or allowed to be present have their work presented or their culture expressed? How can we continue to create a place where we all belong? And this image actually so stays with me. This happened at the Immigration Museum recently when we had the African Festival, and this place really seemed like we had a new community that came in and really engaged in that space like it was their own. It was a home away from home, and I found this to be a really wonderful picture. For our international students as well, we try to create that home away from home through our Lord Mayor's International Student Welcome. More and more we are inviting students to come and be in our space. So the future museum, if I can paint that for you briefly, it is a type of public space that embraces and entices new audiences across all cultures like never before. It's a place where learning becomes an artistic activity in itself, a place where we can understand better our own place in our world. And in order to do this, we have to ensure that the museum is not just in one site, but also online, increasing the digital capacities and dialogues. And the future museum is going to be a generous kind of museum. It endorses the potential of uncertainty. It nurtures quiet, transformative contemplation, embraces ambiguity, but it also, instead of just collecting shapes of the world in the forms of artworks and objects, it actually chooses to shape the world. The museum of today is going to be a reality-producing machine, a polyphony of voices, actions, and possible encounters. So the museum in the future, with an engaged citizenry, is a power that can indeed change the world, one visitor at a time. On that note, I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your visiting the Immigration Museum sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Rohini. So if you would like to continue this conversation with Rohini, she is now going to be available to talk with you for about another 20 minutes through our Follow the Speaker program, which is just down the stairs in the foyer of IMAX. Another session that's about to start now in the You Can't Do That Green Room, which is located on the upper level of the museum. It's part of the creative entrepreneurship stream. This is a panel entitled Building Startups in the Creative Industries. It's featuring Bonnie Shaw from the Smart City Office at the City of Melbourne, John McCormack from Sensi Lab at Monash University, Sarah Moran, who's a co-founder of Girl Geek Academy, and Helen Simonson from ACME and Anna Berkey from State Library of Victoria, who are jointly running the newly announced Foundry 658 Creative Industries Accelerator Program. But we have a wonderful keynote in here as well. Our next keynote speaker is Lena van Deventer. She's the co-author of a wonderful book entitled Game Changers. She's a writer, a game developer, an educator from Melbourne. In 2013, she co-founded Widget, which is a support group for women and non-binary game developers, and there are now 800 members of this group and rapidly growing. In 2016, as I mentioned, she co-authored Game Changers, From Minecraft to Misogyny, which is about the fight for the future of video games. She's also was on the curatorial advisory group for ACME's Codebreakers exhibition last year, which sought to kind of smash the stereotype that the games industry didn't have a vibrant future for women in games. And she's the deputy chair of an interactive advisory committee for the Australian Writers Guild, and is also on the board of the Dragons. So, in her keynote, Canaries and Coal Mines, Women in Games and the Birth of the Alt-Right.
Thank you very much. What a lovely introduction. Now I don't have to do it. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Lena Van Deventer, as has been noted. I'm a game developer, writer and educator, taught at Swinburne University, the Victorian College of the Arts and RMIT University. As Katrina said, in 2013 I co-founded Widget, a support network for women and non-binary game developers. I won the Pioneer Award at the inaugural MCV Pacific Women in Games Awards in 2015. In 2016 I wrote this with Dan Golding for a Firm Press, and I sat on ACME's curatorial advisory committee on the Codebreakers exhibition and the Victorian Women's Trust. Now I'm saying all that not to just talk about myself for a while, which is terrifying, but to indicate a snapshot of my key interests: creative technology, activism, and activism in creative technology. That's my jam. I'm passionate about discovering and researching the cultural infrastructure required to ensure the best support systems for practitioners and makers. And in games, that's a feminist issue. We are at a risk, huge risk, of hemorrhaging talent if we don't do something soon. Excuse me. One of the factors behind this is that we, and when I say we, I mean women in games, we were the canaries in the coal mine of the post-truth world. We were first hit up by the trumped-up vacuums that now grace the front pages of our newspapers, and where people were. So I just want to get something out of the way first, for anyone who may be quietly scoffing in their minds about the legitimacy of games, or has watched Sunrise in the last week and has seen how games are absolutely rotting our children from the inside out, and Fortnite is evil. So let's have a wee sidebar about why games should be included in cultural conversations and why that interests me. So I may just come here about work with play, versus wasteful, or important versus trivial emerge, and the paradoxical concept of Immanuel Kant's purposiveness without purpose emerges. It's a really hard word to say, but I promise it's a word. He knows what he's doing. Historically, play and learning share similar histories. So in ancient Greece, rhetoric was inexplicitly linked to play. Attempting to sway opinion based